Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's financial education webinar on auto buying made easy. My name is Vincent Delgado. I'm the Education Outreach Manager here at Cesslock Credit Union. We have a special guest with us. His name is Javier. I'm going to cover a couple housekeeping items, and then Javier, I'm going to have you jump in and tell us a little bit more about your position and your role. But again, before we do that, I wanted to just address a couple housekeeping items. First and foremost, today's webinar is being recorded. So if you have to leave early, if you get sidetracked, or you want to share the recording with a family member, friend, neighbor, you name it, we are recording today's presentation. So you'll get a link to the recording. If not later today, tomorrow morning, it'll be a link to a YouTube, so you can revisit the presentation or share with those maybe that you think might be interested. We encourage any and all questions during today's presentation. I'd like for these to be as interactive as possible. Obviously, Javier and myself will be going over a few slides, but we want to make sure, especially considering the topic, that you all have an opportunity to ask questions. So please do so throughout the presentation. There is a Q&A box, I believe, somewhere on your device. For me, I have a bar at the top of my screen with a couple different options, and I think if you click more, at least on mine, it says Q&A. Feel free to use that to ask any questions, not only throughout the presentation, but then at the very end, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. And Javier and I will be able to take care of those questions. Lastly, a little bit more about Cesslock. We are the largest locally owned financial institution here in San Luis Obispo. We've been around for a little over 80 years. Our members are local. The money stays local. We couldn't be more proud to serve this area. For those of you that are members that are joining us, thank you so much for your membership. Let us know if there's anything we can do to help. For those that aren't members, hopefully you get some great information based on today's topic, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. With that being said, I do want to make sure I introduce, or at least have Javier introduce himself. Considering the topic, he's a great wealth of information as it relates to auto buying. So Javier, you want to share a little bit about yourself with the group?
Yes, thanks, Vincent. Welcome, everyone. My name is Javier Aguilera. I'm the program manager for indirect lending here with Cesslock. I work with dealerships from right now built-in all the way to Paso Robles. I deal with franchises and also independent dealerships. So I work with them when they have questions. I go out there, talk to them about our program that we offer. It's called CUDLs, Credit Union Direct Lending. That's a way that our members are able to go into a dealership, purchase a vehicle, have the loan funded through Cesslock. So they'll send us the loan, we'll work on it on our side, and then we'll fund it. And then that way you guys can just do everything there. Makes it more convenient for our members. So I manage that program there. So I oversee the underwriting, the relationships with the dealers, also the back office here. So that's what I do here.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. And again, most of the presentation today, I'll help answer a few questions, but there's a lot that I'm probably going to toss to Javier, and also Javier, as you know, you've done this before. I'll probably ask for you to provide further insight, maybe on a slide throughout the presentation. So again, he's a great resource. You can see our contact information on there. So if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help answer any questions that maybe you don't want to ask during the presentation, or you think of it as it comes up later. So I want to definitely talk a little bit about the current market. Again, today we're going to be talking about auto buying made easy, and we're going to cover a lot of topics, which you'll see on the next slide here. But I at least want to provide a little bit of insight as to kind of what we're all seeing, not just Javier and myself, but you all as well too. It seems as if, and not it seems, it is that the auto buying industry is top of mind right now, whether it's the tariffs that have set prices maybe being higher, but when it comes to auto buying, it really has created a pretty big topic here, at least in the United States. And so the auto industry is seeing some tariffs, and they have begun to kind of set in. And America's, dealerships and car lots and consumers, obviously us, are starting to see a little bit of a rise. However, the increases so far have been a bit softer than maybe the headlines would have suggested. Um, you know, some of these impacts are also a tad bit unevenly distributed in the sense that some automakers have pledged to hold prices flat, maybe through June, while others have already started raising prices that you see on the specific window. And so, I think again, if you're a car shopper that's heading out, to a car lot soon, you may find, a variety of prices and maybe some deals to be had or not. But again, we'll make sure that we cover a lot of that right now. The average new car buyer paid a little over 48,000 or just under $49,000 and about $25,000 for a used car in April. Auto loan interest rates remain relatively high, with an average for a 60-month car loan at 7.42%. There's a noticeable increase in new vehicles being priced under $30,000, with inventory in this segment rising by about 42% year over year, offering some more choices for us, maybe budget conscious buyers. So I felt as if these maybe 3 bullet points were good starting points to share with kind of the current market and what we're seeing. That $48,000 price for average new car is, I think, a very, very slight increase compared to last year around this time. So again, not a ton of increase from maybe last year into this year, but still, maybe a TBD on what we can expect in the next few months. I want to at least share some of the topics that we will be covering over the next, maybe 20 or 30-ish minutes. First, on this next slide, we're definitely going to talk about tariffs and the auto industry. Again, when you think about auto buying, especially right now in present time, you can't see or hear anything without hearing tariffs. We're going to talk about setting your budget, maybe some things to look out for before you even begin to step foot on a dealership lot or browse vehicles. We're going to talk a little bit more about loans versus leases and which one maybe works for you. Type of vehicle we won't talk about too much. We'll maybe gloss over that a little bit. We'll dive into new versus used, the financing, and maybe some of the other additional costs that are associated with that. We'll talk about some tips while you're at the dealership, and then again, we'll have Q&A with Javier, but he'll be here as well throughout the presentation to help expand on maybe a few points. So with that being said, again, let's dive into this first important topic here, tariffs in the auto industry. And if you can't already tell by maybe the way that I'm describing it, it's a bit complicated. But the important part for all of us as consumers is that unfortunately, maybe, most new cars are going to become a bit more expensive in the coming weeks and maybe even in the coming months. Once the current stock of kind of pre-tariff cars is sold from dealership lots, they're most likely going to be replaced with models hit with that 25% tariff. Exactly, how much prices will rise on those vehicles is maybe a little bit harder to predict. Like a lot of other industries, automotive production is a complicated global affair, many parts across multiple borders. And so, there's a lot more that goes into the final car's production than just from one central location. And so, I think, as I alluded to, the low end of expected increases looks to be a couple $1,000s, maybe between 3,000 and 5,000, which on the surface doesn't seem like that much. But there are some analysts forecasting that prices can increase as high as $10,000 to $15,000, depending on certain imported vehicles. The 25% tariff on imported auto parts has made vehicle repairs a bit more expensive. So even for domestically assembled cars here in the U.S. That maybe rely on foreign components, that could be something of interest and something that's we should maybe pay attention to as we maybe need to take our cars to the dealership or to auto lots to get repairs. Elevated or increased vehicle prices may lead to higher loan amounts, higher monthly payments, potentially making financing a little bit more challenging for some buyers. I do want to mention as well too, I saw in the news in the headlines that there maybe was an agreement in place for trade or tariffs, and I don't know exactly what that necessarily relates to in terms of this conversation, but take that, with a grain of salt as well too. Javier, do you have any further insight on this? When you're at dealerships, are you hearing folks at the dealerships talk a little about this? Any other info you can share with the group?
Yes, yeah. So when I visit dealerships, this is something that I kind of ask and see if what feedback I can get from them, and so they're all keeping an eye on this. They are saying that right now they are not seeing any price increases right now. Um, some of them are doing is incentives like that they have, buy a car, you get like X amount of money back. Because of the tariffs, they are gonna be cutting back those incentives, and instead of raising prices, they're just gonna, instead of, say if you buy a car, they give you $3,000. So instead of raising the price, they'll just say, okay, you buy a car for that price, there's not an incentive on it, so that way they don't have to raise the prices. So they're kind of doing that right now, so that way they don't have to raise prices. Another thing that kind of just with tariffs is kind of affect is like parts, auto parts, take your car to get in, to get repair, might cost a little bit more now just because the parts are coming from, foreign countries. So it's not just buying the car, but sometimes it's getting the repairs done on your cars you can see that increase as well. So that's kind of what's going out there right now.
Yeah, it seems as if it's a little bit of a complicated maybe dance that's going on, not just with parts, but with new vehicles as a whole. And again, this is, I don't want to say it's ever evolving, but be aware that there could be some changes. And so just paying at least close attention to it. But it is encouraging, Javier, that you share at least right now. There's not a huge increase, but who knows what maybe the next 3 to 6 to 12 months can potentially hold. So let's talk a little bit about setting your budget. We know that when you begin to think about purchasing, your new vehicle or your used vehicle, at the end of the day, really it boils down to what you can afford, to effectively budget for a new car purchase or a car purchase in general, new or used. It's important to maybe understand your financial situation and some other car related expenses. Of course, we all want the nice car, leather interior, you name it. But obviously those come with increased money. And so, setting your budget, especially as it aligns with some of your other financial priorities, then you're able to determine maybe how much you can spend on your transportation needs. First things first, I think it's really good to just establish what your income is and decide how much you're going to be willing to allocate towards transportation. Experts will say that you should think of spending between 10 and 15% of your income on transportation. This includes your car payment, car insurance, fuel, which when you think of it in that amount, that's a decent amount of money. Car payments are I think on average, I just saw this morning, an average new car payment is roughly around 740 something dollars. Insurance, it's pretty expensive. Car insurance rates, especially here in California, are pretty high. Maybe it's a couple $100s for you. Fuel, depending on how much you're driving and how much fuel costs in your area, maybe you're spending a couple $100s a month on fuel. So now you're quickly looking at around $1,000 a month just on your 10 to 50, just on your transportation costs. And does that make up the 10 to 15% of your income? If your take home pay is $4,000 per month, then you should be spending around maybe $400 to $600 on transportation. So just begin to think of it in that lens. Obviously everyone's income is different, but you don't want to overextend yourself. So really hone in on what that number might look like. But understand that around 10 to 15% is kind of that target range for all of those costs in total. The next biggest thing, and probably arguably one of the more important things, next to knowing how much you can comfortably spend without overextending yourself, is focusing on your credit score. You may choose to finance your purchase with a loan or a lease, and According to Experian data from 2023, more than 85% of new cars and 36% of used cars are bought with car loans. So when you're applying for that loan or that lease, which we'll talk about it a little bit, lenders are going to review your credit score. Once approved, your interest rate is going to be set, and that rate is based upon your credit score, and it helps determine your repayment amount. It's important that we're taking a look at our credit score. It's important that our credit score is as high as it can possibly be, because we know that, your interest rate is really tied to, how much you're going to be paying and your total repayment costs. A lower rate means lower payments, less money spent over the life of the loan. And, a lower credit score means, you're going to be spending a little bit more money. So you'll expect higher interest rates and then higher expected monthly payments. So really focus in on that credit score. And the great thing is, maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was a little bit more difficult to kind of know where your credit stood. Nowadays, regardless of the financial institution that you're with, you can pretty easily see where you stand credit-wise. I know with SESLOC, when I log into my app, I can see, what my credit score is, or at least get a pretty rough estimate as to what my credit score is. So I know before I even go into the dealership, if I'm going to qualify for one of those special, the commercials or whatever they're advertising, I know I'm going to qualify for something like that. Or I know when I go into my lender, SESLOC, or you name it, I know I'm going to qualify for that lower score or that lower interest rate because my credit score is pretty high. So just really pay attention to that. If there's ways you want to increase that score, pay down some total debt. That's probably, the biggest thing that you can do for yourself is decreasing some of those debts that you do have to make sure your credit score is increasing. Lastly, and we'll talk a little bit about it on this next slide here, is are you putting any money down? Are you maybe trading in a vehicle? This can also help decrease your monthly costs and the total cost of the loan that you might be borrowing. So obviously factor that in as well too when you begin to look at your budget for the purchase on your new vehicle, along with your credit score. Anything to add on this, Javier? And I know this stuff's pretty straightforward, but anything else to add?
No, I think you covered it all good. Yeah. Credit scores is important, just knowing kind of where you're at before you go in there, because that helps. Especially if you see like a really high rate they're offering you and you have really good score, then, that way you can make sure that, they don't offer you something that you should not be getting because your credit score is better. So I think you nailed it.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to, I know for those maybe that are SESLOC members and you have the SESLOC app, I want to get the wording correct, but yeah, so honestly, when you log into your mobile app and you scroll down just a couple times, you can see your credit score right there, and you click on it and opens up a window, and it'll see exactly kind of where you stand in terms of your credit score. And it'll give you an analysis on maybe areas in which you can improve upon. Are you struggling with, your total debt that you're carrying? And so maybe over the next month or two, you focus on decreasing those debts, which will increase your score, which will allow you to potentially, get better rates on your auto loan upcoming. So again, I think that's a really, really big point is making sure we're focusing on that credit score. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, a big thing that could impact, maybe your budget as you take out a loan on your vehicle, and that's trading in, your car. Maybe you have a vehicle, it's for whatever reason not serving a purpose for you, or you want to upgrade, or it's getting a tad old. The good news is that, and I know Javier will probably speak on this, the ongoing shortage of used cars will be with us for maybe the next few years, and as a result, you'll likely see some pretty good offers for your used car, not only this month, but in the near future. I know that a couple of years, 2 years ago now, I sold the vehicle that I had, and I was very surprised at the value that I got for it, considering it was I think a 2011 model vehicle that I had, and what they were able to pay me for it. So I know that that's good news for all of us, not only if you're just selling it, but if you're trading in it as well too. So a few tips, search for the best price that you can get, and shop it around. It's super easy to do nowadays. Use the Kelley Blue Book. That website is a great resource. But research your vehicle's value. It'll ask for a few bits of information, maybe your VIN, but other information about the vehicle. Be honest on it. It's going to ask you about certain conditions and things like that. But be as honest as you can, because you want to make sure you're getting, the accurate number for your trade-in or for your sell. And then, don't be afraid to call around to local dealerships and see what they'll offer you for that specific vehicle. Javier, any tips or other things to add about folks that are potentially wanting to trade in their vehicle as part of a new purchase?
Yeah, on the trade-in part, just make sure you separate the trade-in conversation from your new car negotiation. So don't, they're going to try to kind of combine it, and they're going to work it to where it's best for them. So you definitely want to separate those conversations. This is my car trading in. Okay, how much are you going to give me? Do that first, and then also negotiate your car price separate, not including that trade-in. So that way, keep it separate. That way you can see numbers and numbers. Just makes it easier for you. So that's a tip that I would let you guys know or tell you guys about.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, let's dive into the next couple slides here. We're going to talk a little bit about leasing versus loaning and the difference between the two, and maybe help you if you're someone in the audience that's trying to determine which avenue you want to go down. The choice between buying your vehicle and getting a loan for it or leasing is often a tough call. On the one hand, buying potentially involves higher monthly costs, but you own the vehicle, which is great in the end. On the other hand, a lease potentially could come with, or traditionally has, lower monthly payments and lets you drive that vehicle. That may be a little bit more expensive than you can afford, but unfortunately, you get into the cycle of kind of always having a car payment, always having to pay for a vehicle instead of owning it outright and being done with payments. So, it really is whichever is best for you. So the quick definition with a lease, you make monthly payments to drive a car for a set term. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the next graphic that we have. Again, traditionally with the lease, the payment is often less than the cost of financing a new vehicle. And buyers or leasers will return the car at the end of their term. With a loan, you're buying a vehicle with a car loan or a loan from a lender. And it's pretty straightforward. You borrow money from a credit union, bank, lending institution, whatever. You make your monthly payments for a set number of years, and then after that's done, you have your car and you own it outright, and you're done making car payments, which is what we all love at the end of that loan. So it's pretty straightforward, but there are some other details to take into account, and it's listed right here on this graphic. With a loan, obviously you own the vehicle, you get to keep it. With a lease, you don't own it. Again, as we shared, you return the vehicle at the end of the lease. Monthly payments traditionally are higher with a loan because you're paying off the entire purchase price of the vehicle. With a lease, it's traditionally a little bit lower, as you're kind of only paying for the vehicle's depreciation. For a loan, an early termination, you can sell, you can trade in your vehicle at any time. If necessary, money from the sale can be used to pay off the loan balance. For a lease, if you end the lease agreement early, charges can be pretty costly, as you're not sticking with the contract. So, on occasion, a dealer may buy the car from a leasing company as a trade-in, letting you off the hook, but that's not always the case. With a loan, when you purchase the car, you don't have to worry about mileage. Drive as many miles as you want. With a lease, when you agree to a lease term, oftentimes they set mileage limits on that lease. Maybe it's 10,000 miles a year. Maybe it's 12,000 miles a year. You can negotiate for a higher mileage limit, but you'll have to pay charges for exceeding those limits. So obviously keep that in mind as well too. If you're a family or an individual that drives pretty frequently, you have a longer commute, you may want to pay a little bit closer attention to lease and those mileage caps that you do have. At the end of the term with a loan, you're done. You're done with your loan payments. You're done. You're adios. You're gone. With a lease, at the end of the lease, depending on how long, you can choose to finance the purchase of the vehicle or lease or buy a car or other choices that you have. So this at least provides in writing a little bit more of a difference or determining factor between loaning versus leasing. Javier, anything else you want to add? We might have a question here as well. well, we do have a question. So Javier, if you want to answer this, do you have to put money down when you lease a vehicle?
Some of them will require it, but I think you can probably get away mostly with not putting anything down, but most will require a down payment to get into a lease.
Gotcha. Anything else you want to speak on as it relates to lease versus loan?
No, just kind of think of it, a lease is more just like think of it as a subscription to a car. It's kind of like I tell some people, so but you hit all the points, so I think you covered them.
Subscription to a car. I like I like that. It's like Netflix, just a little bit more expensive, right?
Yes.
Cool. That's a good way to look at it. Appreciate it. So let's talk a little bit here about new versus used. We've talked how, used cars are, the value is a little bit higher now, and because there is a little bit more of a shortage. And then, at least from what I've noticed, depending on the type of vehicle, used cars are lasting a little bit longer, they're a little bit more reliable. But a quick difference, because many folks are trying to figure out, should I buy new? And I understand that obviously it's a little bit more costly, or should I just go the used route? With new, obviously, there's no wear and tear on the vehicle. Your new purchase comes straight from the shipping truck to the lot with a very clean history, with less than 10 miles on the actual vehicle. With the used, obviously, it's a little less expensive when you're buying the car, but it's been pre-owned, and someone else has kind of taken that hit in the price depreciation. New vehicles tend to have better warranties. There's the manufacturer's warranties, dealership warranties, and they can kind of cover the cost in case something major happens. Used vehicles, sometimes they may not. If you're buying from a certified dealership, they may offer some warranties, but that's not necessarily always the case. So just understand that. Newer cars come with newer technology. Tech that may have been advanced 10 years ago is incredibly standard now. I know when I bought my car, what I shared that I bought that vehicle when I bought it in 2000, what was it, 11 or 12? I can't remember what I said. Like it was like a backup camera was and Apple Play or Bluetooth connection was so advanced then. Like that was it just blew my mind. Nowadays, again, it's almost a basic package, right? So something to understand between new versus used. Newer cars tend to be a tad bit more fuel efficient, better technology. And so I think it's just these are a few differences to understand between the new versus used argument. Javier, anything to add on this new versus used? I mean, again, I know it's pretty straightforward, but anything to add?
No, just I think sometimes like the middle ground there is like you said, you hit on the certified pre-owned,
Mhm.
it's used, but then the dealer is kind of certifying, so you kind of get like like a limited warranty on there. So sometimes that might help. So if, someone doesn't feel as comfortable buying maybe a used one because they think something might go wrong, maybe looking at the certified pre-owned is kind of, like a middle ground, I guess.
And so I know you mentioned the dealership has their certified pre-owned, but is there, for those that are maybe leery of trusting the dealership, is there a way to verify the used car that you're looking at on the dealership lot is like that it hasn't been through any accidents? Are you able to like look up VINs on site, or how does that work if there's folks that are maybe a little bit leery about that used vehicle purchase?
Most of the time they offer the Carfax,
Okay.
and that's a good way because that'll tell you if there's been an accident, repairs, because all that is reported.
Hmm.
So the Carfax will usually have, that history on that auto you're looking to buy. So you can always ask them, hey, can I have the Carfax for this car? If some of them don't provide it, you can always purchase it yourself through Carfax. Or there's other companies too that do it, but that's like one of the bigger ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if they don't offer it, maybe, and if you really like the car, you want to just make sure, then you can just go online and you can get it, buy it yourself, and that way you feel, comfortable making that purchase.
Give yourself some peace of mind.
Yeah.
Um, we're going to be transitioning here into discussing some financing, but um, it seems pretty straightforward for a new vehicle loan, used vehicle loan. Obviously, if it's coming from a certified dealership, that's a pretty easy process. What about like private, like a used vehicle from a private seller, be it, a mom and pop dealership or like a private seller, like through Facebook or whatever. How does, and I know we're transitioning into the finance slides here, but how does that work if someone's like wanting to get a loan and they're purchasing a vehicle from like a private seller? How does that work? Javier, you there?
Yeah, sorry. I muted myself.
No.
So if you're looking to buy a loan, I mean, get a car from a private party, you would go into the branch, you would let them know that that's what you're looking to do. Um, they're going to ask for the information on the vehicle you're looking to buy, probably the VIN number, mileage, year, type, all that. If they have registration, if the person you're buying it from lets you, have that so you can take it in. But with that information there, like the VIN number, the mileage and all that, the branch or online, whichever way you want to do it, they'll be able to get the process started. So you'll go in there, give them the purchase price. They'll be able to look at the value as well, so we can see, because then you run into loan to value, depending on the year of the vehicle, the mileage. There's only a certain amount that we can borrow up to. So then that's where, once you submit the application, that's when the underwriter will then review it and say, okay, you're asking for $15,000, but we can only go up to X amount. So this is how much, we can do. And then you can either go back and negotiate with the person or just put that difference in yourself. So,
Gotcha.
but yeah, just going into the branch, getting that process started, then the banker there will help you navigate that, what we need and everything.
Cool. Great. Thanks for sharing. So let's dive a little bit now more into some finance related questions. Financing a car, I think there was a stigma or a stereotype, or it was just kind of true that, maybe 10, 15 years ago, that financing a car seemed incredibly overwhelming. And it probably was. That stereotype was probably warranted, especially for those maybe doing it for the first time. But I think, recently it hasn't become as terrible or as painful of a process. It's arguably one of the bigger financial purchases that you're going to make in your lifetime, and you may make it a couple of times, next to, buying a home. But really it's not, I think, as bad as it used to be. And there really are three major things that you want to consider or factor in when you're getting a loan for your vehicle. The bigger one is the loan amount, the APR, kind of the interest rate that you're going to be paying, and then the loan term that you're going to be agreeing to. These are there are three of the bigger items that you're going to want to pay attention to: the amount of money that you're going to be borrowing for the vehicle, the interest rate you're going to pay on the loan, and then the amount of time you have to pay back that loan. All of that is going to allow you to understand, your payments every single month, and how much you're going to be borrowing. It's common for car buyers to put off the thought of financing until they're at a dealership's financing office. Unfortunately, and it's maybe changed a little bit, but I think, and Javier is probably going to recommend as well too, that that's not the route that you go anymore, or you maybe not want to go anymore. It may be better to get kind of that pre-approval, or talk with Cesslock or whoever your lender is ahead of time, to save time at the dealership, know what you're going to qualify for, and then head to the dealership. Javier, do you want to expand a little bit more on that process, what that pre-approval process looks like, whether it's with Cesslock or another lender?
Yes. So the process is, you would go in, say you go into one of the branches, and you say, hey, I'm interested in buying a car. You might not, some people might know exactly what they're wanting to buy, some people might not, so it just depends. So that's going to be kind of, if you know exactly the car, you can tell us, hey, I'm buying a 2025 Honda Accord. I see it there for $35,000. That's what I'm looking. And then, we would put all that information in the system. We would take, your income. We can do, check your credit at the time and then see how much you can qualify for. Once we do all that, then we'll give you a letter saying, you've been qualified for this amount. And that's when you go to the dealership, that's where you give them the letter saying, hey, I've been pre-approved already through my bank. Um, and then that'll just help you kind of have an idea kind of what kind of car you want. Sometimes you just keep in mind when you do that, you might go in there looking for a brand new car and then you find, hey, this is a used one that's just, has less, doesn't have that many miles, I'm saving $10,000, maybe I want to go there. So just keep in mind that sometimes when you get pre-approved, you might get pre-approved for a certain amount. The rate is a certain amount because it's based off that car. But then if you go in and you change it, that can change there. So just, the term, the rate, all that might change. So just keep in mind that that might happen just because I know sometimes we had, with some of our members go in there and they say like, hey, I got pre-approved for say 6%. And then all of a sudden now, the dealer comes back and says, oh, well, you got approved for 9%. And then, you went from a new car to a used car. So, there's a difference there. So just keep that in mind. But that's basically how that pre-approval work. Also, when you get pre-approved, since like the program called CUDO, Credit Union Direct Lending, what the dealership is going to do, they're going to collect your information again. They're going to enter into their system. And then what it does is sends it to us. And then that way we're able to process the loan through CUDO. Um, you'll provide all your documentation. If you need any other additional documentation to the dealership will send it all to us, and then we'll fund the loan. You'll sign all the documents with them. They'll send us everything here, and then we'll fund the loan. So most of the time when you go through CUDO, everything is done at the dealership, and we just work kind of behind the screen and do all the work, and then you'll sign everything there with them. So um, sometimes some of the dealerships are not in our program. So what happens there is you have to get a purchase order from them. After you work out the details, price, everything of the vehicle, you'll bring that purchase order to us at the branch, and then we'll process the loan, get all that done, collect all the documents from you, and then we'll send the the check and everything once everything is done, and then you go pick up your car. So depending on which way you want to go, depending if they're in our program or not, then you can go through the CUDO, or you can do doing a purchase order coming into the branch.
There's a question here and it says the dealer I'm working with now wants to run my credit. Even though I told them I would not be using their financial services, they said they need to run it just to make sure I can afford it. Is this normal?
Yeah, dealers they want to check. One is they like to check the credit because if they can offer you something better, they're trying to save you some money. They want you to go through them because, once you go through a dealership, they're able to offer you products. That's how they make their money. So that's sometimes why they say that. They also try to say it's because of like fraud. They want to make sure that you are legitimately trying to buy a car, and you really are pre-approved. So that's kind of standard. Is they'll still do that, but I mean, if you really don't want them, you can be adamant and say, no, I'm pre-approved. I don't need you to check my credit, and they won't. But that's kind of how they'll try to do that.
Gotcha. Another question here, does CESLOC, and I think you kind of answered it, does CESLOC need a letter of some kind from the dealership showing the purchase price of the car to start the loan process? And then how does that work with reducing the rate offer that CESLOC offers if we're putting down 20% of the value? The second part's a little confusing.
The pre-approval letter also, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, also what they can do is if you're pre-approved through us, When they go into the system, they put your name and your social, and then that'll bring up the application that we enter on our side. So that is also one way that they won't check your credit, because we already did it on our side. So they're able to bring up that application, and they'll just put in the details that's missing, like, the vehicle, the mileage, all that stuff that we don't know yet. So they can do it that way by you getting pre-approved. So that helps out. One is, they don't have to put your credit again because we already did it. And then the 20% question, if you finance a vehicle and it's under 80%, you do get a 1/4% discount on the rate. So that's what that is. So either you do 20% or more. If you're under 80%, then you get 1/4% off. Or if you set an automatic payment out of your SESLOC checking account, we give you a 1/4%. And that's either or, so it's not combined. So if you are given, putting more than 20% down, then you'll get that 1/4%. If you're not putting 20% down and you still want to get that 1/4%, once your loan funds come into a Chase branch and say, hey, I want to set up my auto pay from my checking account, and then you'll get an automatic 1/4% off your rate.
Nice. Great. So we do have a couple more questions, but I'll make sure I'll get to those at the end because I do want to get through a couple of these slides here, which are relatively quick. At the dealership, and sometimes some of this is pretty basic stuff, and Javier, you can expand on them if you want. But some tips while you're at the car dealership: visit during the weekday if you're unsure. Weekends, super packed, super crowded, families, kids, you name it. Weekday, you'll probably have a better chance at the salesperson maybe being a little bit more attentive to you, and not feeling as pressured when you're there. Test drives are still important. Don't skip on this step. I know nowadays with advances in technology, you can watch videos, you can read all about it, but still, test drives are still pretty important and pretty critical. So make sure with obviously a purchase of this size that you're still doing some of those test drives. Holidays still have great deals. I think obviously the next bigger holiday would maybe be 4th of July for holidays, and then after that is it Labor Day maybe. And then you're fast approaching that August, September, October time period where dealerships are trying to get maybe some of the current 2025 models off the lot to make room for 2026. So keep that in mind as your auto shopping comes up. Don't count on the salesperson to volunteer deals on the vehicle. Maybe ask all questions. What other deals can you offer? What are other specials? Things like that. And then understand what you can and can't negotiate. So examples like, you may think you can negotiate title and registration fees. That can't be changed. That's not something you can negotiate. But warranties, maintenance, trade-in value, things like that are fair game. So just make sure you're not embarrassing yourself trying to get the upper hand in the negotiation when you can't negotiate title and registration fees. So again, just understand that process as well too. One last thing that I want Javier to touch on here, and that many folks we frequently get questions on is the refinancing process. Refinancing a car loan involves getting a new loan to pay off and replace your current one. So maybe you purchased a vehicle a year or two ago when rates were higher, and now rates are a little bit lower, and you're in a situation where you feel like you want to refinance. This new loan obviously comes with a lower interest rate or a different repayment period. Javier, do you want to share, like, does SESLOC offer refinancing options? When do you typically see refinancing? Anything further on this?
Yes, SESLOC does offer refinancing. You're able to refinance your car basically at any point that, once you have your car, there's no really time period that you have to wait to refinance it. And it could be for, different reasons. One, you want to lower your rate. The rate you got when you were there was higher, and now we're offering a lower rate, so you want to refinance that. Or say, at the time your credit wasn't as good, you got a higher rate. Now you've been working to improve your credit score. Now it's better, so now you can refinance that. Some people also want to lower their payment. You did like a 60-month term. your payment is, a little bit higher and you're like, I really need to get my payment lower just to be able to budget myself. You can come back in and say, hey, I want to refinance my loan now to 72 months instead. So, that'll drop your payment. So that helps you out. Some people may have their car paid off, and they want to take some cash out. Well, some people will do a cash out refi on an auto. So that we've seen those as well. So maybe pay off a high credit card or something they have or emergency that might need some money. So we have different options that you can refinance or different reasons that you can refinance.
Awesome. Thanks. So we have questions coming in, but I did want to just lastly here, kind of in summary, again, car buying process can be pretty easy. Making sure you're analyzing your budget, what you can afford, doing some further research on which car you want to purchase. Obviously, the negotiation process is key. This is a major purchase, so just make sure that you're doing your due diligence ahead of time. And lastly, whether it's Javier, myself, your nearest branch, don't hesitate to reach out to Cesslock. If you have any questions, we want to make sure we're here for you before you make that purchase. Now's the time for questions. We do have some that have come in. Javier, do you do small business auto loans, or does Cesslock do small business auto loans?
Cesslock does them. I don't. So those will have to go through our business department.
Gotcha.
And they do them as well. So
Right.
you can just call in and say you want to talk to one of the business lenders, and they'll be able to get you information on that.
Cool. Thank you. A question here about what are documentation fees? So those are just things that are from the dealership to cover the cost of processing paperwork and some of the administrative staff or administrative tasks that are related to purchasing the vehicle. So, again, I feel like whatever purchase you make, there's oftentimes these documentation fees. Sometimes they can be pretty little. So that's kind of what that was referenced to in that slide. Can my credit score be checked if I have them locked at all three agencies? So no. The quick answer to that is no. If there's a thing called credit freeze. For those of you that don't or are unaware, you can freeze your credit. It helps keep kind of your credit safe in case a scammer or something gets a hold of your personal information and they don't tank your credit score that way. And it prevents new loans from being opened in your name. So if they are frozen at all three of the credit agencies, your score cannot be checked. Like the dealership or the lender is not going to be able to check your score because it's frozen. So you'd have to unfreeze them at all three agencies or unlock them at all three agencies before you begin that process. Great question. Here's another question. I don't know if I know how to answer this. How do you negotiate for a car? I've never had any success doing that. Javier, I don't know if you have any tips or if you're a pro negotiator.
I think it's just kind of knowing the value of the car. So, using like the KBB will help you kind of know what you're looking for. Price wise. So look at it, see if it's, price high, what compared to what its value. Sometimes it's also depending on the vehicle, some of them are, that people really want. So those are going to be marked up just because they know they can sell it. So just knowing the type of vehicle you are, looking to buy, just kind of do some research on that. The pricing is more on that. And then also, then once you figure out the pricing, then you have to now talk about the additional products. So that's like the warranties, the gap. Some of the stuff is good to have, some of the stuff is not. So just keep in mind all that. And one thing too is don't fall for the monthly payment trap. Because they're going to try to get you to say, oh, what payment are you looking for? And as long as we get you to that payment, are you happy? Well, that's not really the way you want to go because say the car's worth 50,000 and at say I want an $800 payment, if you're looking at 60 months, your payment's gonna be higher, and they're like, okay, let's do 84 months. They won't tell you that. They're like, oh, here's your payment you wanted. So now you end up paying more for it, but they get you for the payment. So just be careful with that. Just know how much, negotiate the price of the vehicle, not by payment, but what the vehicle price is. So just that's something that I always tell my members is, do not fall for the monthly payment trap.
That's such valuable information. I was over here taking notes as well too. I appreciate that. Another question here. I recall you mentioned that a down payment could lower the monthly payment. A friend of mine who used to sell vehicles at a used car dealer said the down payment is the sales agent's commission that is split with the manager. Is that accurate, or is that maybe some hearsay?
Yeah, I think that's hearsay because the down payment is actually being reduced from your loan amount. So, if you put $3,000 down, that's going to go towards your loan amount, reduced it by 3,000. So, there's no way, we're not going to give them a loan and they're not going to give us that money. So, um, yeah, that's not true.
Any other questions here, folks? I know we've got a few more minutes. Appreciate you sticking around, Javier, and answering all these questions. Any other last minute questions as maybe some come in? I did want to share a great resource that we have, Green Path Financial Wellness. So they're a trusted partner of Sesloc's. I mentioned, credit scores are very important when, doing this auto buying process. I alluded to the fact that maybe some folks have not maybe the best credit score because you could potentially be carrying large loads of debt. And maybe you're someone on the call that is struggling with some debt management. You have some high credit card balances. You're maybe, not knowing where to turn, and there's a lot of temptation out there from folks that are promising to rid you of your debt. And at times it may be difficult to trust them. Green Path, again, is one of our trusted professionals. If you're someone that's struggling with debt and how to manage your debt, feel free to give them a call or visit their website, Green Path. They can help you with debt management plans, and it's not a gimmick. It's not a quick fix. It's really that they help you consolidate some of your debt, and that they really take care of Cesslock members. They also have home buying counseling, consultations for student loans. They're really a great resource for maybe some things that maybe we can't help with. Green Path definitely can. So highly encourage you to reach out to Green Path if you're someone that's maybe struggling with some of that debt or have questions maybe about that home ownership process. I would highly encourage you to reach out to Green Path. We do have another question that came in here. What about negotiations for oil changes, warranties, things of that nature?
So those are always negotiable. Warranties, they're going to start off at the highest they can because hopefully they can sell it at that. So they sell them for say, this is just an example. Their cost might be like $1,000. They're going to start off at like say 2,000. Because they want to make as much as they can. And then you might say no, then they might drop it to 1,500. So there's definitely negotiation that you can do with the warranties. Another thing that for the warranty, just be careful with because there is different, they're covered for say 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years. They might offer you one at first, a 10-year one for $3,000. You say no, and then they're like, okay, let's do a 5-year for 1,000. You're like, oh yeah, that's way better than two. But then now you're not really, you're only protected for 5 versus a 10. So keep that in mind when you're negotiating those warranties. Say, I want, in case you want the 10-year one, say, I'm really interested in the 10, but I don't really want to pay that. Can I get, ask them what's the best you can do on that. So those are negotiable. Oil changes, same thing. Keep in mind now, like I have a hybrid. And one thing that they threw in, they said, "Oh, you get free oil changes for 2 years," and I'm like, "Oh, sweet! I do one oil change a year." So, is that really a savings? Not really. It's like $100 a year. I mean, they gave it to me for free, so I guess it was good. But I mean, if they try to sell it, just keep in mind, like all these the new cars, oil changes now are lasting longer. That you have to do them, especially if you like get a hybrid or something like that. You're not gonna have to do them that often, so just keep that in mind. Um, and then also on those too, like for instance, mine, usually like 15%, 20%, then that's when you take it in. I think I took mine in when it was like 18 or 20%, I forget what it was. And they're like, oh, no, no, you can't bring it in until it says 15%. So I had to go drive it more and then bring it back, because they're going to try to extend it so that way they don't have to use those oil changes. So keep that in mind with those. And like all warranty, everything is negotiable. So
Awesome. Maybe our last question here. I want to pay cash for a new car. Will a dealership entertain a offer based on a percentage amount off of sticker price if paying cash?
It's pretty interesting. Before I used to think, oh, cash is keen. You go in there and you tell them cash, they're going to give me the best price. They're not. One is they want you to finance it because then they can sell you the products, and they make their money off really the products, the warranties, all that stuff. When you buy it cash, they don't have an opportunity to sell you anything. Um, some of the time, it's going to be hard to be able to negotiate when they know you're just buying cash because they're going to be like, well, we're not going to be able to sell them anything. We might as well make our money, selling them the car at a higher price. So if you're going to pay with cash, you might not want to say that up front. Say, hey, I got financed, or say, I want to talk about the price first, just so that way, they're a little bit more willing to negotiate with you.
Gotcha. All righty. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Really appreciate it. Javier, thank you. This was really great. Loved all the questions. Appreciate all the insight. I'm gonna sorry for how fast I'm going. I'm gonna go back to our contact information slide if you ever want to reach out to Javier or myself. Here we go. Don't hesitate to reach out. Again, I'll be sending a link, if not later today, tomorrow morning, to view the recording of the webinar. But again, really appreciate everybody joining us. We are going to go dark the next 2 months in terms of webinars and presentations. So you won't see us. We are going to be posting some content from GreenPath. They host some of their own webinars. So keep an eye out on our newsletters and stuff for some GreenPath information and webinars. But you won't see us probably until August, maybe September. But again, don't hesitate to reach out if you ever have any questions in the meantime. Again, Javier, really appreciate you joining us. This was awesome. Yeah, anything else, Javier?
No, yeah, if you guys have questions, anything, let me know. More than happy to help you out and answer questions for you guys.
Great. Bye, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Have a good rest of your week. And we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.